If a school is going to teach your babies how to hate themselves, it must die and your baby must live. If schooling will teach you to hate your family and your beloved because they have a different way of being in the world, then schooling must die. Yes. So you can live.
It's been a year. It's been an interesting podcast year. I mean, it's not really a year, right?
It's a season.
It's a season.
That's the appropriate word.
It's a new season.
Not seasoning.
It might have been a little bit of that in there too. I'm pulling up my notes of who we have talked to. I mean, just like off top, like what stands out? What are your overall reflections?
Well, not giving too much away about the magic behind the process. For me, what stands out, as I was saying, as we were, gathering recently, was how these spaces became a place for incredible grounding and healing during a particularly turbulent or coming at the end of a turbulent time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning a lot about, I feel like I've learned a lot about rites of passage and initiation. Was even just heard this little tidbit of wisdom the other day that you will be invited into constant initiations until and when you find your community that you are here on this earth to kind of deliver your gift for and to. Mm-hmm. Right? We all come with a gifting. I know we didn't get that recorded from April, but we all come with a purpose and a gifting. And part of like what ritual is the maintenance, of, let's say, a truck that is giving the delivery of the gifting to your community. Mm-hmm. So I think that coming out of what felt like a very intense time in life of a rites of passage, these conversations and where we had them and how we had them and what the context was around the podcast, for me was like I'm like, oh, did I finally arrive? Am I at the community space? Because they were so grounding for me. And I think what stands out is the unexpected twists and turns that each conversation took. Mm-hmm. I thought with the title of each episode or with the people we invited that the certain sound bites would be there, that the particular moment to raise would happen. But each one from, talking with Pastor Mike and where he took us with what really was a profound, almost a reflection on grief, to the conversation with y'all and Mira's midwife, with Kiki, like
Kiki.
the what she was offering us as a grounding in the possibilities of what we call Black autonomous birthing, communities, the impact of that on what our children deserve from education, to this conversation on reparations and land back with Tanish and April, to the grounding wire for this whole season, the space we held with the young people.
Yeah.
Each of those went in ways that I did not expect, but yeah, like a gifting, exactly what I felt like I needed. And I'm hoping that, people who are tapping into this, the medicine that they needed too.
Mm-hmm. I feel that. It was a lot of I left Pastor Mike's interview just like, this. I was just like, we didn't do enough. We didn't frame it right. I just had all this criticism about it.
Yeah.
And then had this epiphany, and you were even on board. Of like how we could navigate it differently. Mm-hmm. And then I just had this epiphany. I hit you up. It's just like, man, I'm tripping. Like I don't get to edit or construct the ways in which spirit speaks. Mm-hmm. I don't get to narrate abolition. Mm-hmm. I don't get to be the author of that. And that was kind of what came to me, is like, how dare you frame this in a way that is so that it's comfortable for you. That's antithetical to the point of the podcast, right? So I was waking up waking up in more ways than one to that reality. And then when we heard from Rebecca about her response or like her reaction to it,
yes,
it was immediate confirmation that what he shared was incredibly timely and medicine, you know. And so I really got checked in the process of that. And I have to, what's hard in being at the forefront of a lot of this is, in not just on the podcast, but in my life in general, is being able to step back and give space for genius, for medicine, for revelation to come. And that's not, you know, very rarely is that through my own framing. And so I feel like we were guided to create the container, not even the container, because that seems so limiting. The infrastructure, maybe, all of that. I don't know.
The Adobe home.
The Adobe
home.
home.
That's right.
And then, you know, what emerges is to emerge.
Yeah.
So I feel that it was reminding me, Kenjus and I held space with our children and community yesterday. It was reminding me of your attempt to put on the puppet show.
Yeah.
And the vision you had for how it was going to be carried out.
Yeah.
And then what really happened.
Yeah, and it made me want to give up. Full stop. I'm a professional puppeteerist.
Yes, you
Puppeteerist,
are.
ventriloquist.
Yep.
I take it very seriously. For those who didn't know, it's my night job. Coming to a city, town, YouTube near you.
Yeah.
And it's hard because and I think it speaks to what you're saying, right? Like when the little ones were like, we're not trying to hear your exposition from Cookie Monster or Elmo about Dagara medicine.
No.
What a sentence. We ain't trying to hear that shit. We want Cookie Monster to eat these leaves.
Yeah.
And Elmo to talk about why his eyes are covered. And I felt like that meant there was no more Dagara medicine to share. But it was in the way that we even I hear you throwing not shade, but in you're offering correctives in a lesson analogy from my puppet show, but I will also raise your game that we were playing to share the Gara medicine, which was veiled competition.
It was competition.
Straight up,
yeah.
you know, gladiator shit. Apparently,
it was Hunger Games.
Yeah, literally like the opening scene when they walked into the Hunger Games, all run towards the cornucopia. So, but that's an aside. I like how you bring up my puppet show, my gentle, like, I don't know. Meanwhile, Tips had the kids fighting each other. The babies going, whoever gets the football first. People are listening like, what? But yeah, so it's I think real. Like what it taught me, point going after your work, like when it doesn't happen the way you think it's supposed to happen, I felt like, well, there's nothing left for me to do.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing we didn't talk about was like, which I think is happening in this podcast, is the audiobook of AE, where we held a ceremony in what essentially for me was a church service. And being someone who's raised in the church and the school, even when spirit would move in our space, there was still constraints. And so I think that I give credence to like how I was trained.
Yeah.
That even if spirit's going to come through, it happens on our timetable, in our way, in our space. And I think that that's a part of this undoing or unlearning process.
And also the ways in which these confining cultural ways of being are very much in us. And they show up in our attempts to do what we consider to be radical or revolutionary, or it shows up. And like it didn't even hit me that it was a competition until I thought it was a brilliant game.
It was. I would have loved
it. Because we're really good at that, you know? And I always tell people, man, people think I'm like calm, and man, when I coached basketball, that's when you saw, that was a beast that would come out. They're cussing in front of kids and just I had to win at any cost. But, you know, we're all working on it. Yeah, I think the audio book to me was also intense because we are, I don't know, very idealistic, especially you, Kenjus, around time and capacity.
Of course. Always. I'll be there in 5 minutes, to quote a fallen prophet.
Yeah, so we definitely thought that we would be able to do an audiobook of our article in 2 hours. And I was really fearful the day of. And then we did it. So that was weird. That was weird that happened. One take. On time, one take with folks who either are still in the Black church or came from it. I think there's some powerful healing there. But so much of the Apocalyptic Education podcast this season is about dreaming, envisioning, dreaming of new ways of being, frameworks. Mm-hmm. Y'all, Kenjus is trying to write his next article while I'm sharing all these things, and
I'm sending important. I have children.
I wasn't even gonna say nothing, but I think I want to be as authentic as possible.
Be rude, yeah, to anyone.
That is Kenjus in a nutshell. That is the essence of this brother. But it's just the imagination of these new worlds. And you and I were talking the other day, and I'm super excited about getting into it because people are going to think we're even weirder than we are.
Okay.
We talk about cults a lot.
Okay. We're going there.
0 to 5,000.
This is the last episode of the podcast, though, right? Okay, cool. So we wait until the end.
Exactly.
All right.
I think it's important for people to know that we have had multiple conversations about what people call cults. You don't think that's important for folks to know?
I mean, some people, maybe, certain people, but this seems like it's a conversation with everybody. So as spirit moves, as we were just saying, it's apparently important for everybody.
I was excited. Fun facts about Tiffani. She's fascinated with cults. She's watched probably every documentary about plane crashes that's ever been created. She's loves the X-Files and knows Dana Scully's badge number by heart, 2317-616.
Yeah, that's.
I mean.
Intense.
Fun facts. Those are fun facts.
Yeah, I love that. I love all those things about you.
Yeah, and I think
they're wonderful.
I think they're amazing. But in the context of what we call cults, you and I mean, how have you heard or experienced how we talk about these things?
How we talk about
how
it
you and I
relative
talk
to the
about it.
dominant framework or narrative for me was like Jim Jones, and growing up. There was the all those school specials, watching any sitcoms where they're like, watch out.
Yep.
Corey Matthews, his brother on Boy Meets World, got in a cult, like I remember one of those.
I forgot about that.
You know what I'm saying? Those episodes they were very, which is interesting given the church community that I grew up with, and which was 1,000% cultish, But I think like how we talk about it was similar to, I think, this concept of what it would mean to join with others in an intentional way, an intentional autonomous community, as we learned from so many folks doing anarchist practice, and then what goes wrong. I'm always looking for that, and I think we've talked about that before, because maroon communities were autonomous communities, cults, right? Fugitive spaces, autonomous community. According to the U.S. state, right, some indigenous communities are autonomous cult communities. But the root word of culture is cult.
Oh, man. We going there. Okay.
The ways of being that emerge from a people group that allow them to survive and remain autonomous. Culture.
Yep.
From Barbara Sizemore, right? Shout out to Dr. Lamont Terry for that wisdom that he brought into my present understanding from Sizemore. So that, to me, is how I've heard us talk about cults. Autonomous communities centered around survival and autonomy that in many ways go off the rails. But what were you thinking?
And just that. And like I love those documentaries myself. I'm always fascinated. And it's like when I hear it, because there's this hegemony, you're just supposed to shun these places, these groups, but I'm like, when I watch the documentaries, the frameworks are enticing. It's really about, I think, a lot of the vision and the framework for what eventually become named as cults are like, they are, as you're saying, autonomous communities. They are people who have recognized that the existing way of being is harming them. And they are collectively coming together as a way to envision, to dream, to move forward with something that is more beneficial. And especially you talk about Jim Jones, like that's Bay Area, that's San Francisco.
Yeah, which I'm learning from you
We
recently.
right here.
Yeah.
And that whole hype was fascinating because it's hella black people. And I'm like, what is going on in the current society where hella black people are going to follow this random white dude in the 70s? That means the current society has to be horrific for black people to be like, you know what?
Jim Jones or Jimmy Carter, which one, right?
Very nice. Very nice. Well done. And I'm like, I feel like we've talked about it. Folks get to these places and, oh man, I just thought of Waco. We got to get to that too, because that.
Okay, let's go.
It's gonna support. It's gonna support this year in review.
Okay.
But I'm like, what point does it become a cult? Is it a cult because it's a group of people who feel like the current society is harmful and there's agreement there? Because for me, anybody, or most of the time, if the dominant society is shaming a group of people, I'm interested in that group of people. I'm not going to shame them. If the dominant society is saying, don't be like them, I'm going to study them and see how I should be like them. But is it because, what makes it a cult? Is it because a lot of these, and it's like the hegemony around what we see, it's always the same recipe. It's usually this straight man, white man who's leading it, throngs of people who leave everything behind. They go off, they're practicing the new world that they want to be a part of, and then it ends in mass suicide. And so and I'm like, I love our work because we're not afraid to find the meaning in the mess. And so people look at the outcome, and you were talking about the Ibu landing that was named as mass suicide. Folks will be like, what in the world are they really going here? But it's labeled as that, but there are folks who look at it from different epistemological frameworks and might see something else. But I'm like, I can critique maybe the downfall of these communities is because they're led by straight white men, but we've also talked about it in a lot of different contexts. What do you think about when does it become a cult, or when is it problematic?
I think the word, like going to the root of cult as culture, we usually center around some kind of spiritual agreement or practice, commonality. It becomes that when, as you said, the dominant society says, this is not of us, which is to say, I can't absorb this. I can't eat this. This is not food I like. It actually feels like it's going to harm me, which I think is really powerful. Someone has popped up a kind of, someone, former relation who always talked about fungi, right? Mycelium kind of networks, and how fungus will pop up to be a kind of medicine for whatever the possible toxic reality is. And I think of those cults as that. They're like these individual, think of them as like mycelium networks that pop up and are both medicine for certain peoples, but they're not going to work for the current world. And I think so much of what we talk about, like the wisdom that you bring from Song of Solomon, and the narratives in there, that there's a work to be done that is simply not of or digestible or good for this world. And that will make you or those people practicing necessary threats to identify, to name, to co-opt, to counter, repress. We know that. And so much of this world is built upon how do we maintain peace without justice? And cults make that difficult because they're not interested in peace without justice. They're barely interested in coexistence in some ways. Or maybe it's the state the other way around. It's not interested in coexistence. It's interested in codependency, And so if a cult is saying we're not of you, we don't need you. That's a big problem for something trying to absorb most of the world.
Yeah, that's fascinating to me. And that's super fascinating to me. I was thinking about also like because I know folks who were going to the meetings that Jim Jones was holding.
That's what you were telling me.
Yeah.
And you frame it in that way of like black people from the Bay Area.
We're fascinated, and many left here. And so when we talk about abolition work, right? I think the thing that is fascinating to me about cults is, and we talked about this with April and Tanish in that episode, was that so much of this new world that we dream of and desire toward is like, it's not practiced in the present moment. And right. What we call cults is that's what it is. It's an attempt to do that.
That's right.
This is what we want. This is what we're dreaming of. And so let's go attempt to carry that out. And I'm going to do a side note and I'm going to come back to the downfall. You know, in Waco, Texas, I was watching a recent documentary about that. And they got a call. These cats they doing their thing. They practicing their new society. Of course, it's driven by, you know, heteropatriarchy and white supremacy. Of course, you got. It would be remiss of us to not acknowledge the trauma that's imposed upon children and women in these spaces. So we're not celebrating that at all. I want to call that out. But there's a call about this community that is living sustainably on their own. And our armed forces, our most powerful, supposedly, group of people in this society roll up and they get put on their backs by this tiny community who outweapon them. And this thing lasts, I think, like 50-something days. It's like the second longest, I could be wrong, standoff?
Yeah.
Since like the Civil War or something ridiculous. Like it's like one of the most both egregious and intense models to study in terms of sustainability. Because folks rolled up and they got checked. And I think it had less to do with the sustainability of the community at that time than this image that you can defend yours and it be known. So maybe that's the same thing, right? Is that you can be this thriving community. Like that narrative could not get out there, which is what I think led to the ridiculousness of this and how many people were harmed and in which ways. That narrative was really powerful to me in thinking about that. But like in terms of the downfall, because we talked about like rhetorically, we are in alignment with most of it and most of the guests and what they were saying, whether it's what Kiki was talking about, April and Tanisha were talking about, what the kids are talking about, just the ability to be, as Tatiana said, and exist without people imposing on you.
Yes.
That is autonomy, right? And that requires a certain level of abolition. You and I have been talking about, so why are these, because I don't necessarily think these leaders, and maybe they do, but I, somewhere in my spirit, doesn't believe they start off corrupt. And they're like, my desire is for this many people to be taken out.
Yeah.
I think somewhere in there, spiritually, something happens. And then that's where we start to see the hegemony of the downfall of these places that are attempting to practice right, their own apocalyptic education. What do you think is what leads to that?
Oh, I was going to ask you. You're asking me. That's a really tough one. The one I saw about a cult was the one in like Oregon, Bakwan. I don't know. That was the name of the leader. I don't know the name of the community, but similarly, they had. I'd send it to you. They had. It was a document on Netflix, but they had a airport at one point. Goodness. They had lawyers, right? Major lawyers who had been recruited as a part of this cult who were protecting them legally, policy-wise. They had all this land in Oregon. I don't know which indigenous communities that the actual lands were, you know, in deeper relationship with, but basically they had a military. I mean, it was real. And we never watched the end of it, so I don't know what undid it. But the writing was on the wall as they were setting it up. It was something to do with the leader, and these leaders go into these corrupt spaces and end up, as you said, usually by these cis men, cis heterosexual men, promoting or saying live a certain kind of lifestyle that comes out in harm, whether that be sexual harm or violence. You find there's abuses that take place. To your point of whether or not people begin that way or not, that's like asking us about our different ways of gathering. How do we move from people who might love and genuinely appreciate each other to spaces where there's such rupture and disruption that you can't even share physical space. And I think that there's something about forgetting that seems really critical. That something I heard from April and Tanish about this work of needing to always do the inward looking and grounding and not forget your gifting or your purpose. There's the idea that when Europeans came to Africa, they actually came for healing. It's a controversial one, but it's a perspective. And because they had forgotten a lot of their practices, their medicines, their rituals, they forgot who they were. And forgetting can be seen as like a way of lowering the volume on accountability. Like my daughter forgets to, pick up some trash or whatever. She's 4, she forgets, no big deal. But what I'm thinking about more recently, especially with what's going on now, when we go through harm, some learn from Isaiah, when we go through these deep moments of harm, it's not just the trauma that impacts our ability to move or cope. We forget, I think we literally forget who we were maybe prior to that harm, and then become the very part of the harm. So cult leaders, previously, genocided, harmed people, people can become the very essence of what was happening to them if there aren't really, I think, important rituals, that is protocols to metabolize or let burn that which is not you, so that you can retain most of who you are and work in that way.
Yeah, I mean, that's what showed up in our games, in my game. And we can joke about it, but that's what showed up in my practice as an educator, in that I can disagree with something, but also very easily carry out its mission. Both can coexist, and oftentimes they do. I think there are a lot of us, as Jordan said, as Jordan called me out on, he's like, which I still think is a little harsh, but it doesn't mean it wasn't grounded in integrity. He's like, you are my abuser.
Yeah.
And what it means to, the more that you name, you're teaching children about oppression and how it works, and what they should, and what agency is, and the freedom of your body, and how we learn, and you're teaching them these things in the context of a place where they don't get to get up and move around. And so who are you in that process when you're saying that? Or you're using the terminology of freedom in the context of oppression, So I totally understand that. And we've talked about it in the sense of possession.
Yeah.
The way in which this energy, right, literally consumes us. And you've talked about that, of evil, or what we call evil, is just, amnesia.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's these stories that we're learning from all these different, grounded indigenous practices or knowings. It's similar stories, even if they're in different locations and contexts. Like the Windigo, for people we see here in north part of Turtle Island. They have a story about this roaming cannibalistic spirit that will inhabit you and make you into essentially a monster that can never be satisfied, just eats and eats and eats, to the detriment of your community, of yourself, to the world. That comes about when you do something, when you break with the cycle or an important part of life so severely, right? Even if moment of survival, you eat the flesh of another human, you become a Windigo.
Yeah.
Aboriginals have the Yowie. There's stories like that for every different community that I've heard of, indigenous communities, about those of us who forget who we are in such a fundamental way that we would eat our own arm, eat our own children, eat our own selves. And we're in a time and an energy in a world that seemingly is built off of that, constant forgetting,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems maybe in left field, but what you're saying, I feel that way about fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I tell myself, and I will, like, I go on fasts. It's like, I'm not buying no clothes for, this many months or a year. Or I'll probably get to like a year max. But I know in the moment how I feel. It's always like, this last piece is going to complete my closet.
Yep.
And then I won't need it anymore.
Yeah.
And I genuinely feel that. Like, it is real. I'm not just saying that to myself. I believe it in my body. And then I see that next piece and it's like, it's this vintage. And then I try to like rationalize it because it's not just created, it's vintage or secondhand. I'm like, oh, that is the piece right there. Okay. I'm done after this one. And so it was so intense hearing that from you. And I was watching this piece on fast fashion, the Shein brand now. Shein.
I don't know
Shein. They take cues from, so fast fashion, these places, H&M, and so they created that kind of market, but Shein has like come out of nowhere recently, and if they were saying last night, if there's a snowstorm, Shein is not in this country. If there's a snowstorm in New York, they get an email, headquarters, produce. So it's the conditions of the time matched with runway fashion.
Okay.
Go now, get this to us in 2 days.
Wait.
And then it's available. So if there's
why
a
a snowstorm? Yeah.
So it's matching the conditions of the time. So it's super cold.
Oh, I see.
And this is what's hot.
I see.
Right?
Do this. Wow.
So fashion's not, of course, it's not seasonal anymore. It's not, so like the overproduction of cotton, right?
Oh my God.
Leads to all the toxins in our bodies and because it's not made sustainably anymore.
Yeah.
And Shein has come out of the cuts and it's just like, it's an even different framework. And for me, I was getting sad. I was getting really sad watching it. But like after April and Tanisha's episode, I realized what y'all are saying is this is the last breath, actually.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of us being able to contextualize it as such, right? Of like, you're not even, and we can see ourselves as addicted. We can see ourselves as fiending, but so is the dominant culture, where you're like, they're also responding to a very particular timing.
Yeah.
And that's not a matter of being in control anymore, right? Because you're supposed to set the agenda and we, for however long you want us to.
That's right.
We are waiting. But where the dominant culture is now, like, studying us, which they have, but in very, very, very new ways. After hearing that, it didn't give me hope because I don't know about hope, but it gave me inspiration around if that's the last breath, what happens with ceremony, with ritual, and we are disciplined around practicing these communities where it's not even like stuff comes out, there's a fall line, there's a spring line. No, there's the like weekly line now with fast fashion. If people just became immersed in ancestral practice, immersed in the practicing. I'm just thinking about the timeline around those things falling because now they're so dependent. Yeah. We're dependent on each other, which means any one group of people can stop and the whole thing is compromised in a way that I don't know if we've seen before. I may just be talking about the side of my neck, but that's what came up to me. And when we're talking about possession, how I feel when I see these things, and then what happens on like these major social media sites, if I'm gone for a week, they start emailing me they go, "Are you okay?"
Yep. Yep.
We're just checking in.
Yeah.
That's an interesting power dynamic for me.
Yeah, and the possession, I think the possession part is what you're saying is so profound, and my brain is like you're asking, and you're also talking about ceremony. I'm starting sentences like 5 times, like to the point.
Yeah.
You're asking about ceremony, so the goal would actually be to slow down. So I'm gonna try to slow down my response here, but my thoughts went in like 7 different directions.
Yeah.
Like cats with their tails tied, like they're all just running this way. Cause I'm like, one thought is, well, climate change would make that, more climate change. The word is something given to us by the government or by these corporations. It's global warming. So global warming would make that more prevalent and necessary. Mm-hmm. I know this is like the Apocalyptic Ed podcast. Something's a bit too on the nose. Like it's H&M got here's your flood line. Like, you gonna need them capris higher than you gonna need them poems and capris now. You especially need them now, Like it's too much because there's a flood.
Yep.
There's death, there's genocide. So you're gonna need, but we had these conversations back when the pandemic kicked off as we were joking, like, when's the Nike mask gonna come out? And it seemed unreasonable.
Yep.
It seemed silly.
Yeah.
And yet we had designer masks still to this day. So I thought about that. The other part that you were saying, it made me think all the way back to like when Trayvon was murdered and Trayvon Martin was murdered, and then the eventual speed of the world caught up. So February, but by August, Mike Brown's murdered. So there's activation going on. And then by the next year, the next NBA season, I remember LeBron wearing a hoodie in solidarity. Mm-hmm. And I always wondered, how much did that do for the engagement with hoodies as returning back to like the center of fashion frameworks?
Yeah.
Like there are Stussy hoodies now that I saw when I was a kid that were worth whatever, and now they're like thousands of dollars. Mm-hmm. And I always thought, well, that's because it had to be because Trayvon was murdered. Mm-hmm. So like these things have always been built around death, but I think we see it more readily. But to the point about I think the most important thought that came to my mind or memory was that, like something that doesn't want to die will do everything it can to retain as much life as possible.
Yes.
That seems so complicated way to say we all want to survive.
Yeah.
But Danielle, my partner, will talk about this either story she heard or something she saw about a person who was falling. They were either doing mountain rappelling or they were jumping out of a plane. But I think they were doing mountain rappelling, and they fell off the mountain and were kicking and screaming as they were falling. He's like, ah! And then at the last bit of part of their fall, they just came to a stillness of acceptance, right? And I wish there were much more memories being brought to us, or I'll say personally, I wish the elders in my life hadn't been so wounded that I could have sat with, because we've lost a lot of my elders. They've made transition. I wish I could have sat with them during those times when they were preparing to make transition and learn about how to do that better in a way that felt like the last part of that fall. And I think that part of why they weren't able to do that, a lot of them at least weren't public with it, is because they live in a world that refuses to accept its death.
Yeah.
And it's been on this march throughout so much of our time, pushing against it. And so this, I don't want to put framing on it, but it feels like, is it schizophrenia? I've heard the name of it, but like where you're just here then there and here then there. Like we talk about the Hunger Games and that one clip where the president is talking with Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, and he's like, what do we do with this whole rebellion that's emerging around Katniss, the main character, and what she represents for resistance? He's like, murder, then show what dress she's wearing, then do more floggings, public floggings, and then talk about what they're going to eat for dinner on the commercials. Just basically hit them with everything all the time. And that's what my social media feeds look like. That's what my brain feels like sometimes. It's like, yeah, that's what your invocation prompts in me.
Yeah. You're saying something about the surrender.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, kids are the ones. If there's anybody to teach you how to surrender to the death of things and those ways of being that you thought you could not live without, it's young people for sure, and babies especially. But that's fascinating to me. Of like, what to me that is the very urgent practice that we need, is the surrendering. And where does that happen, you know? And when we were doing the other podcast, we had a death doula who was Chanel was supporting us in even just knowing that that's a thing, that's a realm, that's a field, whatever we want to call it. But I am very fascinated with and desiring more spaces where the surrendering, we keep talking about Ibu landing, we talk about cults, we talk about the end of it. And that is usually the evidence of why we shouldn't partake or be interested. Is like, it ends in death. That's the narrative that they give us. It ends in death.
Yeah, yeah.
But what if the ending in death is not frightening to us?
Well, now you're sounding like a cult leader.
And right, we're not talking about the torturing of people. We're talking about there is a spirit and concept of death, the death of my belief that these shirts will do something for me in the midst of this society.
Yeah.
The death of the belief that like schooling is it. The death of the belief that like my family is fulfilled if it looks this way and has these components. That's what I mean. But because we're able to sell the ending, dying, as scary, I think it has implications for most aspects of our lives. And I am fascinated with death doulas, and I forgot the sister who you shared the book that she has coming out, where she was just like, life and death are the same thing.
Yes.
Right? She says, I'm gonna go sit, what did you say? I'm gonna go sit in my hammock and prepare for my death. That messed me up. But it's like, holding my daughter is one of the most ongoing reminders of my imminent death.
Yes.
Every night, it's like, you are leaving this place.
Yes.
And not just in the physical sense, but I die daily in being able to show up for her. Parts of me have to die that I've been holding on to. She is the healthiest when certain parts of me are on this trajectory of death,
Yes.
And so we joke about the game, and even just how I approach young people, and like my class right now, my graduate level course, they are so connected to their well-being that, and on paper, that course is fire. Mm-hmm. In practice, every week, I'm having to let go of this because it's that game again. It sounds dope. Now I'm talking about land stewardship, and I'm still having them do timed presentations and how they talk about it. And they're still doing lit reviews with 4 texts minimum. And
oh no, lit review maps were due yesterday for me. So my apologies, students.
But what comes to you when you're hearing that? I just said a lot.
So much, Tiffany. I think just trying to be present and witness what you're offering. It's so trying to be present and witnessing what you're offering. It's so real. The way that our children invite us to die daily in order. What Pastor Mike say? Something must die if our children are to live.
Ooh,
right.
Yeah, that's the opening. Yeah.
Schools must die if our children are to live.
Yeah.
In me. And another thing came through about how I realized, like, my mom's been through a lot, in her life more recently this past year, and this is like what's on my heart, right? I look a lot like my maternal grandfather. Maybe not look like him. I have his same body. I was born the day after him, and that was always our thing between me and him. Like, he's 50 years and 1 day older than me, or something along those lines. He passed away when I was 16, and so I had this deep and profound connection with him. And it was only after he transitioned or made transition that I understood the woundedness that showed up for him and the harm that it caused so many people in my family, including my mom, and the other experiences she's had with other men who I share names with, who I share faces with. And what I was invited to think about in even the ways that I show up, how my mom birthed some of her medicine, right? That I'm called to be a counter to what was harming her. And not just as an individual son to mother, but what it meant to be a different kind of person who inhabits the body of what we understand to be a man in this world, that is built on what I think is a very, I know a genocidal, suicidal, infanticidal, like feminicidal version of this kind of energy, of masculine energy, and that I'm here in part to be a kind of medicine against that, and the forgetting of that, you know, in the different points in my life have been probably the greatest cause for internal harm or external harm, because it's against my gifting or what I was supposed to be doing here. And when I think about what needs to die, it's like any and all the things that came with this package that maybe were a part of me. Maybe we take on toxic realities to protect ourselves, whatever they may be, but they must die. And what's exciting is like this teaching that, yeah, we birth our medicine. So my children are my medicine. They help me. They help me, just like I think my mom's saying I helped her, help her, like, release these realities. But that fire, whatever that fire is burning, it's not you. That's the beautiful part. That what comes after that, it singes that which is supposed to singe, and releases that which is supposed to release. So I'm interested in really leaning into that, and excited to do work with others who are. I'm also honestly scared about what this all means for the people closest to me. Maybe that's what my children are teaching me too. Even if I can't protect them from what this world is, right? I feel like so much of our trauma as a people, our commitments are centered around protecting our children, I think. So we, gaslight Black parents when they say they want school, they want higher ed, they want AP classes, they want their children to be essentially beaten psychologically in order to get a better job. I'm like, I think we all just want autonomy and, freedom and love and care. We want to protect our children. And I'm realizing, like, I can't be the kind of parent who protects my children despite them, despite their well-being. And I got to let those parts of me die, even if the world is a scary place, or like releasing certain securities, financial, whatever, professional, might render us more vulnerable to possible harm.
As you were saying that, I was thinking about, I was envisioning our children running in this open field, and this actually happened, so it's not like an imagination, but maybe it's both. And they're running, and there are these pieces of sticks or old plants or trees that are kind of there that could trip you up. And I just kept, every time they would, and they're free. They're doing their thing. But the entire time I'm tense. And I'm, every time they, and that's what I feel and understand about just how we exist. And they're fine. But we're so focused on the sensation. that I didn't get to enjoy, and maybe I will in like looking at people's video, like enjoy the fact that our children were together, were speaking in their ancestral tongues. They were pouring into each other. And they are, like, we just lived a dream of so many of our ancestors. But the entire time, I was guided by fear. You know, and it just helps me to give so much grace to our parents and our grandparents. And is that but all those things can be happening.
Yes.
You know, I don't want to, but it's like.
Yes.
And I do think we should navigate back and forth. But I think sometimes we stay on, when we're talking about cults, I imagine people, that's what they'll hear and feel instead of also understanding, like metacognitively, I'm tensing up at certain moments.
Yeah.
Maybe that's actually what I should do some work around so that you don't miss the larger dream that's being enacted on the other side of that thing that is making you tense up, you know, and it's always happening to us. And, you know, so I think that's in closing my prayer for us is just more grace for ourselves.
Yeah.
And to understand that these things are happening. Our dreams are happening. And there are folks who are practicing this new world, and we don't need to name them. We don't need to do documentaries on them, right? Because that's some of my fear when that gets put out there. But that it's happening, and to lean into in that surrender. As the guy is falling off the cliff, may we all be able to embrace the surrender.
Yes.
Of this death that lays before us.
That hopefully we earn. Right? The transition that we came for.
Yeah.
The punctuation, the climax will be stalled in that way.
Yeah.
That's what I'm looking forward to. I think I know this podcast only exists, our conversations exist because there's enough of this around us that's calling it in.
You said it.
You know? So, ashe for your prayer, Tiff.
Ashe.
Yeah.
Well, that's this season of Apocalyptic Education. I'm Tiffany Marie.
I'm the good doctor, Kenjus Watson.
We're out of here. Thank y'all.
All right.
We will embrace a apocalypse. We will embrace an unveiling that says that education is here to bring us life.